What would you do if someone walked into your home and spent an entire evening tearing apart everything about your life? Mocking your furniture, insulting your choices, calling you a failure who had given up on everything that mattered? Most people would throw them out. Some would fight back. But Victoria Hayes had a different plan entirely. Ben Cross thought he was better than everyone else. His expensive suits, his luxury car, his penthouse apartment, these weren't just possessions to him. They were weapons he used to make other people feel small. He had perfected the art of crushing spirits with casual cruelty, of making people question their worth with a few well-placed insults. When Ben arrived at Victoria's tiny studio apartment, he saw exactly what he expected to see. A failure. Someone beneath his notice. Someone he could dismiss, belittle, and forget about without consequence. What Ben didn't see was the careful trap being set around him. He didn't notice the quiet intelligence in Victoria's eyes as she absorbed every cruel word. He didn't realize that his victim was actually the hunter, and he was walking deeper into a web that would change his life forever. By the time the evening was over, Ben would discover that appearances can be more than deceiving, they can be devastating. He would learn that the woman he had dismissed as ordinary was anything but, and he would face consequences that would make his worst nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. But first, he had to reveal exactly who he really was when he thought nobody important was watching. The trap was set. The test was beginning. And Ben Cross had no idea that he was about to fail more spectacularly than he could ever imagine. Victoria Hayes adjusted the single wilted flower in the mason jar on her tiny kitchen counter. The cramped studio apartment looked exactly as she intended, humble, unremarkable, forgettable. 400 square feet of carefully curated simplicity that would make most people uncomfortable. Perfect for tonight's test. Her phone buzzed. Ben Cross had texted that he was downstairs. Coming up now. Hope you're ready for someone who actually knows what the good life looks like. Victoria smiled. She was more ready than he could possibly imagine. The knock on her door came exactly 3 minutes later, aggressive, impatient raps that already told her everything she needed to know about Ben's character. She opened the door to find him standing there in his designer suit, cologne overwhelming the narrow hallway, gold watch catching the fluorescent light. Ben's confident smile faltered the moment he stepped inside. This is it. His eyes swept across the small space with undisguised horror. This is where you live? Victoria closed the door behind him, watching his reaction carefully. Welcome to my home. Home. Ben laughed, but there was no humor in it. Victoria, this is basically a closet. I've seen hotel rooms bigger than this place. He walked deeper into the apartment, his expensive shoes clicking against the worn linoleum flooring. Everything about his body language screamed disgust. He paused at her small dining table, a simple wooden piece she had found at a thrift store, and refinished herself. Is this supposed to be antique or something? Ben ran his finger along the edge dismissively. Because if you're going for that shabby chic look, you missed the chic part entirely. Victoria settled into her reading chair, a comfortable armchair she had reupholstered in soft gray fabric. I like things that have character. Things with stories. Stories. Ben turned to face her, his expression incredulous. The only story this place tells is that you've given up on life. Where's your ambition? Where's your drive to be something more than this? He gestured around the apartment like he was pointing out evidence at a crime scene. His gaze lingered on her small bookshelf, packed with well-worn novels and technical manuals. Let me guess, you spend your evenings reading instead of networking. Building connections. Making something of yourself. Ben shook his head in disappointment. No wonder you're stuck in a place like this. Victoria said nothing. She simply watched him, cataloging every cruel word, every dismissive gesture. Ben moved to her kitchenette, opening cabinets without permission. Generic brands. Store brands. Victoria, do you know what I had for lunch today? A $200 Wagyu steak at Marcus Wellington. That's more than you probably spend on groceries in a month. Probably, Victoria agreed quietly. Her calm response seemed to irritate him further. Ben wanted a reaction, wanted her to feel ashamed, wanted her to beg for his approval or make excuses for her modest lifestyle. You know what your problem is? Ben sat down uninvited on her small couch, spreading his arms across the back like he owned the place. You think small. You live small. You are small. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos. Look at this. This is my penthouse. 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, marble, everything. The monthly rent on my place could buy this entire building. Victoria glanced at the photos politely. It's very impressive. Impressive? Ben's voice rose. It's magnificent. It's what success looks like. It's what a man achieves when he refuses to settle for mediocrity. He stood up abruptly, pacing the small space like a caged animal. I drive a Lamborghini, Victoria. Custom paint job, leather interior that costs more than most people make in a year. When I go to restaurants, they know my name. When I walk into a room, people notice. I'm sure they do. But you... Ben stopped pacing and stared at her. You're invisible. You blend into the background. You're the kind of person who gets overlooked, forgotten, left behind. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly on the arm of her chair, but her expression remained neutral. Is that what you think? It's what I know. Ben's voice carried the cruel certainty of someone who had never been challenged. Look around, Victoria. This apartment, your clothes, your whole presence screams ordinary. Average. Forgettable. He walked to her window, looking out at the view of the neighboring building's brick wall. My view is the entire city skyline. At night, it looks like a field of diamonds. Your view is someone else's failure. Victoria stood up slowly, moving to join him at the window. Sometimes the most interesting things are hidden in plain sight. Ben laughed harshly. Hidden? There's nothing hidden here except disappointment and wasted potential. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Jake Miller, but she declined the call. Ben noticed immediately. Jake Miller? Even your friends have ordinary names. Let me guess, he's probably just as unremarkable as you are. Working some dead-end job, living paycheck to paycheck, dreaming about a life he'll never have the courage to pursue. Jake works hard, Victoria said simply. Hard at what? Serving coffee? Stocking shelves? Victoria, you are who you surround yourself with. If you spend time with losers, you become a loser. Ben moved back to the center of the room, his presence seeming to fill the small space with toxic energy. You want to know what I think happened to you? You gave up. Somewhere along the way, you decided that this was enough. That you didn't deserve better. That you weren't worth more. He picked up a book from her coffee table, a worn copy of a philosophy text. Instead of reading about life, you should be living it. Instead of accepting scraps, you should be demanding the feast. Victoria watched him flip through the pages dismissively. What if someone chooses simplicity? Chooses. Ben threw the book back down. Nobody chooses this, Victoria. This is what happens when you lack the strength, the intelligence, and the determination to build something real. He pointed at her small television. 15 inches? I have a home theater system that costs more than everything in this apartment combined. My sound system has speakers that are individually worth more than your monthly rent. Victoria sat back down, folding her hands in her lap. You seem to measure everything by its price tag. Because price reflects value, Ben said with absolute conviction. It reflects quality, exclusivity, superiority. When you pay premium prices, you get a premium life. He walked to her bathroom, pushing the door open without asking. One towel. Generic soap. A mirror that probably came with the apartment. His voice echoed off the small tiles. This is the bathroom of someone who has stopped caring about herself. When he emerged, his expression was a mixture of pity and disgust. Victoria, I'm trying to help you here. I'm trying to show you what you're missing, what you could have if you just applied yourself. What would you suggest? Ben's eyes lit up at what he perceived as her first sign of interest. First, you get out of this place. Even a decent one-bedroom would be an improvement. Then you start investing in yourself. Better clothes, better appearance, better connections. He began pacing again, warming to his subject. You network with successful people. You learn from them. You mirror their habits, their attitudes, their standards. And then you become worthy of someone like me. The words came out with such casual arrogance that Victoria had to suppress a reaction. Right now, honestly, I'm embarrassed to be seen with you. If my business associates knew I was in a place like this. Ben trailed off, shaking his head at the imagined scandal. You're embarrassed, Victoria repeated slowly. Of course I am. Look, you seem nice enough, but nice doesn't pay for penthouses. Nice doesn't buy respect. Nice doesn't get you into the circles that matter. He sat back down on her couch, leaning forward with the expression of someone delivering hard truths. I make more money in a week than you probably see in a year. My car payment exceeds your rent. My watch cost more than your entire wardrobe. Victoria glanced at the ostentatious timepiece on his wrist. It's very shiny. It's a Patek Philippe, Ben corrected, as if she had personally insulted him. Do you know what that means? It means I have arrived. It means I have taste. It means I understand quality. I see. Her continued calm responses were clearly frustrating him. Ben wanted her to be impressed, intimidated, desperate for his approval. Instead, she sat quietly, observing him like a scientist studying an interesting but unpleasant specimen. You don't get it, do you? Ben's voice took on a harder edge. This isn't just about money, Victoria. It's about standards. It's about refusing to accept less than excellence. He stood up again, his agitation growing. When I take a woman out, she needs to reflect well on me. She needs to enhance my reputation, not damage it. And you don't think I do that? Honestly, no. You look like someone who shops at thrift stores and thinks generic brands are just as good as premium ones. You live like someone who has given up on ever having anything better. Ben walked to her closet, sliding the door open without permission. Victoria watched as he examined her clothes, simple, well-made pieces that she had chosen for comfort and quality rather than brand names. Exactly what I expected, he said, pushing hangers aside. Nothing with any real style. Nothing that shows you understand fashion or sophistication. He pulled out a simple black dress. This looks like something you could buy at any department store. Where's the designer pieces? Where are the clothes that make a statement? What statement should my clothes make? Ben turned to face her, holding the dress like evidence that you're someone worth knowing, that you have taste, that you understand the difference between mediocrity and excellence. He hung the dress back up with obvious disdain. My last girlfriend wore Versace, Prada, designers you've probably never heard of. When we walked into a restaurant together, every head turned. People wanted to know who we were. What happened to her? She wasn't intellectually stimulating enough, Ben said dismissively. Beautiful, yes. Stylish, absolutely. But no depth, no interesting conversation. Victoria almost smiled at the irony. So you're looking for someone with both beauty and intelligence. Exactly. But they also need to understand quality, understand success, understand what it means to live at a certain level. Ben sat back down, his tone becoming almost paternal. That's why I'm being honest with you, Victoria. You have potential. You seem smart enough. But potential means nothing if you don't act on it. How would you suggest I act on it? Start by getting out of this place. Move somewhere that doesn't make people question your judgment. Then invest in yourself, clothes, appearance, the kind of lifestyle that attracts success. He leaned back, looking around the apartment one more time. Because right now, this place tells everyone who sees it that you've settled. That you're comfortable with less. That you don't believe you deserve better. Victoria stood up slowly, walking to her small window. What if I told you that appearances can be deceiving? Ben laughed. Appearances are the only thing that matters in the real world, Victoria. People make judgments in the first 30 seconds. They decide whether you're worth their time, their respect, their business based on what they see. He joined her at the window, standing close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. And what they see when they look at this place, when they look at your lifestyle, is someone who doesn't understand success. Maybe I understand it differently than you do. There's only one way to understand success, Ben said with absolute certainty. Results. Achievements. The ability to afford the best of everything. He turned away from the window, gesturing around the apartment one final time. This isn't success, Victoria. This is surrender. This is what happens when someone stops fighting for something better. Victoria remained at the window, looking out at the brick wall that Ben had mocked. But she wasn't seeing the neighboring building. She was seeing the careful test she had constructed, watching it work exactly as she had planned. Ben Cross had revealed exactly who he was: cruel, shallow, materialistic, and completely lacking in basic human decency. He had failed her test so thoroughly that she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Would you like to go get dinner? Victoria asked, turning back to face him. Ben's expression brightened immediately. Finally, a good idea. There's this place, I know, exclusive, expensive, the kind of restaurant where reservations are impossible to get unless you have connections. Actually, Victoria said quietly, I had somewhere else in mind. Where? Victoria smiled, and for the first time that evening, it was completely genuine. Somewhere I think you'll find very interesting. Ben's eyes lit up with renewed interest as they left Victoria's apartment building. The promise of going somewhere else, somewhere that might meet his standards, had instantly improved his mood. Finally, he said as they walked down the street, I was starting to think you were completely content living like a college student forever. Victoria walked beside him quietly, her hands in the pockets of her simple jacket. She had suggested they walk to the restaurant, claiming it was only a few blocks away. Ben had complained about walking. He preferred arriving everywhere in his Lamborghini, but Victoria had insisted the evening air would be nice. So where are we going? Ben asked for the third time. You're being very mysterious about this place. It's a surprise, Victoria replied. I think you'll find it very much to your taste. They turned the corner onto Fifth Avenue, and Ben's expression immediately shifted to approval. The street was lined with upscale restaurants, luxury boutiques, and the kind of establishments that catered to the wealthy elite he considered himself part of. Now this is more like it, Ben said, straightening his tie. This is the kind of neighborhood where successful people spend their time. Victoria nodded toward an elegant building ahead. The exterior was understated but clearly expensive, marble columns, brass fixtures, and a subtle sign that read the Sterling Club in elegant script. There, she said simply. Ben stopped walking, his eyes widening. The Sterling Club? Victoria, that's impossible. The waiting list for membership there is years long. The initiation fee alone is more than most people make in a decade. Is it? Victoria asked innocently. You can't just walk in there, Ben said, but his voice carried a note of excitement. If Victoria somehow had access to the Sterling Club, it would completely change his assessment of her social standing. They approached the entrance, where a doorman in an immaculate uniform stood guard. Ben straightened his shoulders, preparing to drop names and make connections, but Victoria simply walked up to the man with quiet confidence. Good evening, Thomas, she said warmly. Good evening, Miss Hayes. The doorman replied with a genuine smile. Your usual table, please. Ben's jaw dropped as Thomas opened the door with obvious respect and familiarity. They walked into a lobby that exceeded even Ben's expectations. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors that gleamed like mirrors, and artwork that belonged to museums. How do you know this place? Ben whispered urgently as they followed a hostess toward the dining room. I come here sometimes, Victoria said simply. The dining room was everything Ben had dreamed of and more. The tables were spaced far apart for privacy, each one set with crystal glasses and silver that caught the light from elaborate chandeliers. The clientele was exactly what he expected from such an exclusive establishment, well-dressed, clearly wealthy, speaking in the hushed tones of people accustomed to luxury. They were seated at a corner table, with an excellent view of the room. Ben couldn't stop staring around at the opulent surroundings, his mind racing to understand how Victoria had access to such a place. This is incredible, he breathed. Do you know how exclusive this place is? Do you know the kind of connections you need to even get through the door? Victoria studied her menu calmly. What looks good to you? Ben was too excited to focus on food. Victoria, I have to admit, I completely underestimated you. If you're a member here, if you have this kind of access, why didn't you mention it earlier? You didn't ask. A waiter approached their table with the practiced grace of someone trained to serve the ultra-wealthy. Good evening, Miss Hayes. The usual wine selection. Please, Charles. Ben watched in amazement as Charles returned with a bottle that he recognized as costing several $100s. The waiter poured with ceremony, offering Victoria the first taste as if this were a completely normal occurrence. Excellent as always, Victoria said after sampling the wine. Ben tasted his glass and nearly choked. It was possibly the best wine he had ever experienced, smooth and complex in ways that his usual expensive bottles couldn't match. This wine, he started. It's from a private vineyard, Victoria explained. They only produce a few hundred bottles each year. Ben's mind was reeling. Everything about this evening was shifting his understanding of who Victoria was and what she represented. But rather than becoming humble or apologetic for his earlier behavior, he seemed to view it as validation of his approach to judging people. I have to say, Victoria, you had me completely fooled with that apartment, he said with what he clearly thought was charming laughter. What a clever test. You wanted to see if I was interested in you for the right reasons. Victoria sipped her wine and said nothing. It's actually quite brilliant, Ben continued, warming to his new theory. You live modestly to weed out gold diggers and social climbers. But clearly, you understand quality and exclusivity just as much as I do. Their appetizers arrived, dishes that Ben couldn't pronounce but recognized as the kind of haute cuisine that appeared in food magazines. He took photos discreetly, already planning how he would describe this evening to his business associates. So, tell me, Ben said between bites of what appeared to be caviar arranged like a small work of art. What's your real story? What do you actually do? Because nobody gets access to the Sterling Club by accident. Victoria set down her fork and looked directly at him. What do you think I do? Something in finance, maybe. Or you come from family money. Old money families sometimes live modestly while maintaining their exclusive connections. Interesting theory. Ben was building confidence with each sip of the extraordinary wine. You know what? I respect the strategy. Testing people, seeing who they really are when they think you're ordinary. It shows intelligence and good judgment. He leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, I probably came on a little strong earlier. But you have to understand, I meet so many people who really are just ordinary. It's refreshing to discover someone who actually understands the finer things in life. Victoria watched him carefully as he spoke, noting how quickly he had rewritten history to make himself the victim of her supposed deception rather than acknowledging his own cruel behavior. The thing is, Ben continued, now that I know you have taste and connections, everything changes. We're operating on the same level. We understand each other. Charles appeared at their table again. Miss Hayes, the chef would like to send out the evening's special preparation if you're interested. That would be lovely. Ben watched the interaction with growing excitement. The level of personal attention Victoria was receiving suggested she was far more than just a member here. She was clearly someone important, someone the staff knew well and catered especially. You're a regular here, he observed. I enjoy the atmosphere. More than just a regular, Ben pressed. The way they treat you. Victoria, just how well connected are you? Before she could answer, a distinguished older man in an expensive suit approached their table. Ben recognized him immediately. Robert Hartwell, one of the city's most successful real estate developers and a man whose net worth was discussed in financial magazines. Victoria, Robert said warmly, I didn't expect to see you here tonight. How are the renovations on the downtown project coming along? Very well, thank you, Robert. We should have the permits finalized by next week. Robert nodded approvingly. Excellent. Your architects did beautiful work on the preliminary designs. I'm looking forward to seeing how it turns out. He glanced at Ben with polite curiosity, clearly waiting for an introduction. Robert, this is Ben Cross, Victoria said simply. Ben, Robert Hartwell. Ben nearly knocked over his wine glass in his eagerness to shake hands with someone he had only read about in business journals. Mr. Hartwell, it's an incredible honor. I'm in real estate myself, actually. I followed your work for years. Robert smiled politely, but his attention quickly returned to Victoria. I'll let you enjoy your dinner, my dear. Give my regards to your team. After Robert left, Ben sat in stunned silence for several moments. The implications of what he had just witnessed were staggering. Victoria, he said slowly, what exactly do you do? I work in development. Development? Ben's voice was barely above a whisper. Robert Hartwell was talking to you about permits and architects. He was talking to you like you're his equal. Victoria continued eating her appetizer as if nothing unusual had happened. The downtown project he mentioned, Ben continued, his mind racing. That's the massive mixed-use development everyone's been talking about. The one that's supposed to transform the entire district. It's a nice project. Ben's hands were actually shaking as he reached for his wine glass. If Victoria was involved in the kind of development project that Robert Hartwell discussed with respect and familiarity, she wasn't just wealthy. She was operating at a level that made his own success look insignificant. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, and for the first time that evening, there was genuine vulnerability in his voice rather than arrogance. Tell you what? That you're obviously incredibly successful. That you're operating at this level. Victoria looked at him with calm, steady eyes. Would it have changed how you treated me? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Ben opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. They both knew the answer. Their main courses arrived. each dish a masterpiece of culinary artistry. Ben barely tasted his food, too overwhelmed by the evening's revelations to focus on anything else. "I need to apologize," he said finally. "My behavior earlier was inappropriate. I made assumptions based on appearances, and I was clearly wrong." Victoria nodded but didn't speak. "It's just that you have to understand," Ben continued. "In my business, in my world, appearances matter so much. You learn to make quick judgments about people's worth, their potential, their level of success. And what did you judge about me?" Ben winced. "I thought you were ordinary. I thought you lacked ambition, drive, the understanding of what real success looks like. But now I realize you're probably more successful than I am." The admission clearly pained him. "The way people treat you here, the connections you have, the projects you're involved in. Victoria, you're operating at a level I've only dreamed about." Victoria sipped her wine thoughtfully. "What's interesting to me is how quickly your entire attitude changed. An hour ago, you were embarrassed to be seen with me. Now you're apologizing and trying to impress me." Ben flushed red. "I was wrong. I admit it. But you have to see how misleading your apartment was. Anyone would have made the same assumptions. Would they? Of course. When someone lives so modestly, when they don't display any signs of success or wealth, what are people supposed to think?" Victoria set down her glass and looked directly at him. "Maybe they're supposed to treat people with basic human decency, regardless of their apparent financial status." The words hit Ben like a physical blow. He realized that Victoria hadn't just been testing his ability to recognize hidden wealth. She had been testing his character, his fundamental decency as a human being. And he had failed spectacularly. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're absolutely right. It shouldn't matter what someone's apartment looks like or how much money they appear to have. I should have treated you with respect from the beginning." Victoria nodded slowly. "Yes, you should have. Can we start over?" Ben asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Now that I understand who you really are, now that I know better, start over." "Yes. Forget about my behavior earlier. Let me show you who I really am when I'm not making foolish assumptions." Victoria considered this for a long moment. Around them, the elegant restaurant continued its quiet hum of conversation and crystal clinking against china. The atmosphere was serene, civilized, everything that Ben's earlier behavior had not been. "Actually," Victoria said finally, "I think you showed me exactly who you really are earlier this evening." Ben's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "I mean that your behavior in my apartment revealed your true character. The way you spoke to me, the way you dismissed and belittled me, the casual cruelty in your words, that wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. That was who you are when you think someone can't benefit you." "But I apologized. I explained. I was wrong about your situation. You were wrong about my financial situation," Victoria corrected. "But you were right about something else. You said I was testing you. And you failed that test completely." Ben stared at her, beginning to understand that this evening was not going to end the way he had hoped. "The question now," Victoria continued calmly, "is what happens next." She signaled to Charles for the check, and Ben watched in growing panic as she prepared to end their dinner. Everything he thought he had salvaged was slipping away from him. "Victoria, please," he said urgently. "Give me another chance. Let me prove that I can be better." "Why should I?" The simple question left him speechless. He had spent the entire evening focused on what he wanted, what he needed, what would benefit him. He had never once considered what Victoria might want or need from him. "Because." He started, then stopped. Every answer he could think of was still fundamentally selfish. Victoria signed the check with the practiced ease of someone who had done so many times before. "Would you like to see something interesting?" Ben nodded eagerly, hoping this meant he still had a chance to redeem himself. "Let's take a walk," Victoria said, standing from the table. As they left the Sterling Club, Ben felt like he was walking toward either salvation or judgment. He had no idea which, but he knew that Victoria held all the power now. The evening air was cool and clear, and Victoria led him down streets he didn't recognize, toward a part of the city that seemed to blend industrial and upscale in ways that confused him. "Where are we going?" he asked. Victoria smiled, and something in that smile made Ben's stomach tighten with apprehension. "Somewhere I think you'll find very educational." Victoria led Ben through increasingly unfamiliar streets, past converted warehouses and sleek modern buildings that seemed to blend industrial heritage with contemporary luxury. The neighborhood had an energy that Ben couldn't quite place. It felt important, exclusive, but in a way he didn't understand. "This area is developing fast," Ben said, trying to make conversation as his nervousness grew. "Good investment opportunities if you know where to look." "Yes," Victoria agreed quietly. "If you know where to look." They walked for several more blocks before Victoria stopped in front of what appeared to be a private airfield. Ben could see the lights of a runway in the distance, and several buildings that looked like luxury hangars. His confusion deepened. "Why are we here?" he asked. "You'll see." Victoria approached a security gate where a uniformed guard immediately recognized her. "Good evening, Miss Hayes. Everything is prepared as you requested." "Thank you, Marcus." The gate opened, and Victoria walked through as if she owned the place. Ben followed hesitantly, his mind racing to understand what was happening. They were on private property now, clearly somewhere that required special access and permissions. "Victoria, I don't understand. What is this place?" "It's where I keep some of my transportation." They walked past several hangars, each one large enough to house significant aircraft. Ben could hear the distant hum of jet engines and sea lights moving in the darkness. This wasn't just any airfield. This was clearly a facility for the ultra-wealthy, the kind of people who own private jets. Victoria stopped in front of the largest hangar. The building was modern and imposing, with clean lines and expensive materials. She pressed her palm against a biometric scanner, and massive doors began to open with mechanical precision. What Ben saw inside made his knees weak. A pristine Gulfstream G650 sat in the center of the hangar like a piece of art. The aircraft was enormous, sleek, and obviously worth more money than Ben had ever seen in one place. The exterior gleamed under the hangar lights, and through the windows, he could see an interior that looked more like a luxury hotel suite than an airplane. "This is yours." Ben's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Yes." Ben walked closer to the aircraft, his eyes taking in details that made his earlier bragging about expensive cars seem pathetic by comparison. The custom paint job alone probably cost more than his Lamborghini. The engines were massive, suggesting power and capability that spoke to unlimited resources. "Victoria, this plane. Do you know what something like this costs?" "Approximately $70 million for the base model. Mine has some custom modifications that brought the total closer to $85 million. Ben felt dizzy. $85 million. He had been bragging about his penthouse rent and his expensive watch to someone who casually owned an aircraft worth more than most companies. "How?" he asked weakly. Victoria walked to the aircraft and pressed another scanner. A stairway descended from the fuselage with mechanical precision. "Would you like to see inside?" Ben nodded mutely and followed her up the stairs. If the exterior had been impressive, the interior was beyond his comprehension. The cabin was configured like a luxury apartment, with cream leather seating, polished with surfaces, and technology that seemed to belong in a science fiction movie. "This is the main cabin," Victoria said, her voice taking on the tone of someone giving a casual tour. "It seats 12 comfortably, but I rarely travel with that many people." Ben sank into one of the leather seats, running his hands over surfaces that were softer and more luxurious than anything in his supposedly upscale lifestyle. The seat alone probably cost more than most people's cars. "There's a bedroom suite in the back," Victoria continued, "a full galley kitchen, and a communication center that allows me to work at full capacity while traveling anywhere in the world." She moved to a cabinet and retrieved a bottle of champagne that Ben recognized as costing several $1,000s. She poured 2 glasses with practiced ease. "The range is approximately 7,000 nautical miles," she said, handing him a glass. "Which means I can fly from New York to Tokyo without stopping, or from London to Singapore, or from Los Angeles to Moscow." Ben took the champagne but couldn't bring himself to drink it. His entire understanding of wealth, success, and his own place in the world was crumbling around him. "Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. What do you actually do? What is your business?" Because nobody owns something like this without being incredibly, impossibly successful at something. Victoria settled into the seat across from him, her champagne glass reflecting the cabin's elegant lighting. "I own several companies. Technology development, real estate, some manufacturing interests. Several companies. The technology company is probably the most significant," she said casually. "We develop artificial intelligence applications for various industries. The real estate portfolio includes commercial and residential properties in major cities worldwide. The manufacturing focuses on sustainable energy solutions. Ben stared at her. Each business she had mentioned so casually would represent hundreds of millions of dollars in value. Combined, they painted a picture of wealth that existed in a completely different universe from his own modest success. When you say you own these companies, I mean I founded them, built them, and maintain controlling interest in all of them. Victoria, are you telling me that you're a billionaire? She considered the question thoughtfully. Financial magazines seemed to think so, yes. Ben set down his champagne glass with hands that were visibly shaking. You're a billionaire. You own a private jet worth $85 million. You have connections that include people like Robert Hartwell. And I spent the evening mocking your tiny apartment and telling you that you lacked ambition. Yes, you did. The simple confirmation hit him like a physical blow. Ben put his head in his hands, finally understanding the full magnitude of his behavior and its consequences. I'm the biggest fool who has ever lived, he said quietly. Perhaps Victoria agreed. Why? Ben looked up at her with desperate eyes. Why did you let me humiliate myself like that? Why didn't you just tell me who you were from the beginning? Victoria sipped her champagne and studied him carefully. Because I needed to know who you were. The real you. The you that emerges when you think someone has no power, no influence, no ability to help or hurt you. And what did you discover? I discovered exactly what I expected to discover. You're cruel to people you perceive as beneath you. You measure human worth entirely by material possessions and financial success. You lack basic empathy and decency. Each word was delivered calmly, without anger, which somehow made them more devastating than if she had been shouting. But I apologized, Ben said weakly. When I realized my mistake, I apologized. You apologized when you realized I might be useful to you, Victoria corrected. You apologized when you understood that I had power and connections that could benefit you. That's not genuine remorse. That's calculated self-interest. Ben opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. She was absolutely right. What happens now? He asked. Victoria stood up and moved to one of the aircraft's windows, looking out at the hangar that housed her impossible wealth. Now you learn about consequences. What do you mean? She turned back to face him, and for the first time that evening, Ben saw something harder in her expression. Not anger, but a cold determination that made his blood freeze. Do you remember earlier this evening when you bragged about your penthouse? The one with the 42nd floor view and the marble everything. Yes, I own that building, Ben. The words hit him like a physical blow. Ben felt the color drain from his face as the implication became clear. You own my building. I purchased it 6 months ago as part of a portfolio acquisition. The previous owners were planning to convert it to condominiums, but I've been considering other options. Ben's mouth went dry. What kind of other options? Well, for example, I could decide that the building needs extensive renovations that would require all current tenants to relocate temporarily. Or I could choose to convert it to affordable housing, which would mean current market rate tenants would need to find alternative accommodations. You're going to evict me. I'm going to evict you tomorrow morning, Victoria said with calm certainty. Your lease is actually month to month despite what you've been telling people. I checked. You have 30 days to find new accommodations. Ben felt like the floor was falling away beneath him. His penthouse, the source of so much of his pride and bragging, was about to disappear. And worse, he was learning that his impressive lifestyle had been dependent on the charity of someone he had spent the evening insulting. Victoria, please. I know I was wrong. I know I behaved terribly. But don't destroy my life over one bad evening. One bad evening. Victoria's voice carried the first hint of real emotion. Ben, do you think this is the first time you've behaved this way? Do you think tonight was an aberration? What do you mean? I mean, I had you investigated before we met. I know how you treat service workers, how you speak to people you consider beneath you, how you built your entire identity around putting others down to make yourself feel superior. Ben's blood turned to ice. You investigated me? I investigate everyone I consider dating. It's a necessary precaution when you have substantial assets to protect. She moved back to her seat, settling in with a relaxed posture of someone completely in control of the situation. Your former tenants, the elderly couple you had evicted last year because you thought their apartment could rent for more money, they're currently staying at a homeless shelter. Ben's face went white. How do you know about that? Because I've been anonymously funding that shelter for the past 3 years. Imagine my surprise when I learned that one of the men causing people to need my services was someone I was considering having dinner with. The full picture was becoming clear to Ben now. This hadn't been a casual date that went wrong. This had been a carefully orchestrated test, and he had failed it more completely than he could have imagined. The Hendersons, he said quietly, remembering the elderly couple who had pleaded with him not to evict them from their rent-controlled apartment. Harold and Margaret Henderson, yes. Married 53 years, living on Social Security, no family to help them. You put them on the street so you could raise their rent by $800 a month. Ben wanted to defend himself, to explain that it had just been business, but the words died in his throat. Sitting in Victoria's $85 million aircraft, being confronted with the human cost of his greed, he couldn't find any justification for his actions. There are others, Victoria continued relentlessly. The single mother with 2 children who couldn't afford the rent increase you imposed because you wanted to upgrade the building's profit margins. The disabled veteran who lost his home because you decided his unit would be worth more as a luxury rental. Each example hit Ben like a physical blow. He had never thought about the people he displaced as real human beings with real problems. They had been numbers on a spreadsheet, obstacles to increase profits. Victoria, I didn't think. No, you didn't think. You didn't think about anyone but yourself. Just like tonight when you assumed I was someone you could treat with contempt because I couldn't benefit you. Victoria stood up and moved toward the aircraft's exit. Your ride home is waiting outside. My ride? A taxi. I thought about offering you a lift in my jet, but then I remembered how embarrassed you were to be seen with me earlier this evening. Ben followed her down the aircraft stairs on unsteady legs. Outside the hangar, the yellow taxi waited with its engine running. This is really happening, he said more to himself than to her. You're really going to destroy everything I've built. Victoria turned to face him one final time. Ben, I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply revealing what was always true, that your success was built on cruelty, greed, and the suffering of others. That's not something to be proud of or protected. What am I supposed to do now? Learn to be better. Learn to treat people with decency regardless of what you think they can do for you. Learn that real success isn't measured by how much you can take from others, but by how much you can contribute to making the world better. Ben got into the taxi, his mind reeling with the magnitude of what had just happened. As the car pulled away from the airfield, he looked back through the rear window at Victoria standing in front of her hangar. She was silhouetted against the lights of her incredible aircraft, a figure of impossible wealth and power that he had dismissed as ordinary and worthless just hours before. The taxi driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Rough night. Ben thought about his penthouse that would be gone tomorrow, his carefully constructed lifestyle that was about to crumble, his reputation that would never recover from this humiliation. The roughest, he said quietly. As they drove through the city streets, Ben realized that Victoria had given him something more valuable than he initially understood. She had shown him the truth about himself, about the kind of person he had become, about the cost of his selfishness and cruelty. Whether he would learn from that lesson or continue down the same destructive path was now entirely up to him. Behind them, the lights of the private airfield grew smaller in the distance, but the memory of Victoria's calm, devastating honesty would stay with Ben forever. Some lessons he was learning come with a price tag higher than any luxury he had ever coveted. And some consequences are more expensive than anything money can buy.